to be that close to a win, I think is of course extremely positive.
Clearly today, I think we had the second fastest car, so yeah, big improvements.
The sort of pace that we've seen today has actually come from its sort of diet program.
Cal, it was a driver of the day performance from Max Verstappen.
Coming into this race, knowing how much sort of it all hinged on how these upgrades went and everything else, I think they'll come out of the weekend and Max will be pretty happy.
Welcome back to the Talking Ball podcast powered by Ava Trade. My name is Tommo McCluskey. His name is Calum Nicholas. And what is that helmet behind you, mate? That looks really nice, the big one.
This one? This one is an old Danny Rick helmet.
Nice.
This was a nice little gift from Danny Rick. It's got like a nice little message on there. And yeah.
Brilliant. What a throwback that is. I hope to build out my helmet collection over time. That'd be lovely. But we were back at home this weekend at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg in the beautiful mountains of Austria. The home Grand Prix, of course, because it is the track owned by Red Bull. Cal, what is the vibe? What makes this place special? And particularly during your time working for the team in the garage, was there an extra little bit to this weekend?
Well, yeah, I guess it's a little bit like home advantage, isn't it? I guess it's one of those things that you can't help but sort of embrace the atmosphere, and it's a good one at Austria, right? The fans, they love motor racing. They're there for great races at F1. I think the track traditionally, it provides good racing, and that sort of lifts the mood throughout the weekend. It's one of those races, and I say this about Zandvoort as well, like those moments on the grid before you send the car off for their formation lap, they really build up the intensity as you sort of get into your race day. Yeah, so I love Austria. It's always a good one for me.
I've mentioned it before. I went as a fan back in 2023, sprint weekend, had a great time, and I would put it up there in terms of fan experiences, venues to go. It's a bit of a nightmare to get to. If you can get a hotel nearby, do that. But honestly, I would say beyond any European race I've been to, Austria is the one I'd recommend first and foremost. Have you been able to ever really enjoy it? Or have you always just been in work mode, Cal?
No, to be fair, it's one of the races that I enjoy the most on the calendar. I think, it's in a bit of a busy period for the race teams. And, Austria, it's idyllic, right? It's beautiful. So you can have a really chill weekend. Like, you go to the track, the work's still the work. But when you leave the track, it's kind of one of the races where it's good to sort of take time and wind down. So I always appreciate it for that. And also, if you haven't done this yet, mate, the golf courses in Austria are some of the best I've ever played.
Cal, loads of upgrades on the car this weekend. I counted seven on the upgrade list. Can you give a synopsis, basically, as to your understanding of what we got on the car this weekend? Because there was a lot of build-up, a lot of anticipation that, I don't want to say B-spec car, but big changes coming to the Red Bull this weekend. Yeah,
I mean, you look at the FIA document, it's mostly, flow conditioning. It's all been about sort of extracting the most downforce and making the car more efficient. Everything from side pod inlet to the engine cover, the floor, the top section of the floor, the underside, rear corners, rear suspension fairings. It's a lot. And like you say, it does almost feel like a B-spec car. I wonder, though, if the vast majority of the sort of pace that we've seen today has actually come from its sort of diet program that it's been under. You talk about the weight loss, and I know we started the year severely overweight. I wonder how much of that has sort of actually come from the fact that we've brought some upgrades that are under the bodywork, things that you can't necessarily see or you have to declare on an FIA document. Those can be the things that still gain you a lot of time. And with weight loss, it's one of those things where you're finding all of the tiny little marginal gains. It's not like you'll have one component that's just massively overweight. It's about looking at all of the installations and finding the little areas that you can just find these little gains on. And I wonder how much of it came from the aero and the performance that we brought through the upgrades that we declared, and how much of the performance came from, just losing a bit of timber. We could all do with it at times, right?
No, tell me about it. Absolutely, mate. Look, I mean, the thing is, that's what I find so, I don't know, it's frustrating in one hand, but also really unique and fascinating about F1. It's like, we've bought all these upgrades to this car, but then we're going to Austria where it's roasting hot. It was the heat warning weekend, so you had to wear the cooling vest, and if not, you had to wear ballast to account for it. Then you, obviously, in Austria, you're at a bit of an altitude as well, so slightly thinner air, and this is a bit of a challenge for these engines. I was actually surprised by how many cars did finish I thought there's going to be a lot more retirements this weekend. So you've got all of these different factors going on. And we've seen, Ferrari, I mean, Lewis, again, on pace, kind of won it in Barcelona. And then the Ferraris didn't seem, it felt like we were the second quickest car this weekend. You've got one weekend, such a swing. It's like, how does the team even begin to, we've had a really good weekend and we'll, of course, get into the result. But, to almost analyze this big chunk of upgrades, how do we actually get any learnings when there's so many variables out there? Like it must be so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it really is. And, like you say about Ferrari, I was surprised this weekend. I thought, especially with the hot temps, I thought that would play into their hands after the pace they had in Barcelona, or that Lewis had in Barcelona. So that a bit of a surprise. And I think it's going to be one of those seasons, right, where teams find little bits that help them sort of leapfrog an opponent, but then it swings back the other way. And it sets us up for a really good sort of finish to this season, I think. But one of the, I kind of always think to myself that Austria is probably not one of the best tracks for testing a massive upgrade package, okay, you've got long straights in the first sort of sector and the last bit, but, you've only got that very short second sector to evaluate the data of how the aero is performing around sort of high-speed corners. I think it'll be interesting in Silverstone because, Silverstone does give you a really good evaluation of what you expect to see from the upgrades you've brought. So I think it's one of those ones we're going to have to look into next week. I think next week's a really key week. Great result today. As you said, second quickest car on pace. I genuinely feel that Max could have won that if we hadn't had the incident in Quali. Look, I think we get to Silverstone next week. I think that'll be a really true test of where we're at with this newer B-spec car.
Yeah, because as much as, there's going to be upgrades for other teams, no one's upgrading at the same rate, right? Everyone's bringing upgrades on different weekends, so it's hard to get a judgment. But also, we do have now this week that we can dive into the data, understand this upgrade a bit more that has clearly, been bolted onto the car and has worked, seemingly, so far. So then we can go to Silverstone, which again, home Grand Prix, hopefully make another step forward. Look, Cal, you mentioned the crash in qualifying. Let's talk, of course, about Saturday. I mean, when Max put that, I think it was a purple middle sector, wasn't it? It was like 5 thousandths up on Leclerc at the time. Yeah. Like that's when you move to the front of your seat and you arch your back a little bit more forward. And you're like, hang on a second, could something happen here? Look, Cal, what's your kind of understanding? I guess it was Max was kind of surprised. Caught out, high-speed corner, that right-hander, typically probably expecting a bit more understeer, got a bit of oversteer. I mean, the thing is, he said it himself, Mercedes was so quick in that final sector. Also, you've got a driver and it's Max and he's pushing to the absolute limit. Sometimes these things happen, like it's one of them, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think so. Max is in that position, right, where, for him, probably, more so than the two Mercedes drivers in that situation, he's more inclined to say, right, I'm going to throw absolutely everything at this. Back in the day, we'd call it win it or bin it, right? And that's, and I think it was one of those laps. And obviously, it ended in the wall. But I would rather see a driver go like that in Q3 and then try and pull off what would have been an incredible pole than not give 100% around those last corners. So yeah, it is what it is. Hard lesson learned, and I guess a fairly long evening and a tough morning, Sunday morning for the mechanics in the garage. But like you say, those were the opportunities, those last corners where you could have, Max could have got pole had he managed to finish that lap. I think so. George was quick, but you never really know. Do
you kind of have much of a gist from the team of how much of a recovery job it was? Because it was quite side on, so it felt like that. Maybe, I don't know, what would you look for? That kind of side impact into the barrier. What are the things you're straight away looking at that need to be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm spoken to the garage. I don't know if they actually changed the chassis. I know there were some photos floating about of the spare chassis in the back of the truck. Sometimes that can be misleading and it's just a case of moving it around. So I don't actually know if they did change the chassis, but that's normally your biggest worry with those side impact crashes. What can often happen is that the suspension arms, they damage the protective panels that are there to protect the driver's legs, sort of where the inboard suspension is. And if you damage one of those panels, you can't repair it. The circuit is not safe, so you end up changing the chassis. And it's not to say that chassis is finished. It might be able to go back to the factory and whatever. So it's one of those things. You get the car back, and then there's going to be a load of stuff that you will very clearly, very obviously will know need to change just from its appearance. Then there'll be the things that you need to change from the data. All of these components, especially with suspension, you've got load sensors and all these other things, and you can see how much force has gone through them. And if that exceeds what they've been tested to, then you can't race that component. So then there's all of those components you've got to change. And then from experience, there will just be things that you change out of an abundance of caution, right? So there will be things that would have been on the right-hand side of the car that didn't go anywhere near a wall, but you will say, yeah, but this has seen a lot of load, and we're going to change them out of an abundance of caution. So it will be a lot of work when you have a shunt like that. But, that's what we're here for. That is why Formula One mechanics exist.
That's what pays the bills, mate. That's the thing. And look, also, the biggest censor of them all, Max himself, saying he kind of banged his knees as well.
Yeah.
I guess even that little bit of insight just tells the team, all right, yeah, if there's enough lows to get through all of those layers into the driver and have some kind of impact on him. Fortunately, Max, of course, was okay. But again, it's all, I guess, interesting extra data for you to kind of be able to properly, because the amount of times we've seen it in the past where, a car will crash on Saturday, you think the team will fix it, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong during the race. That's the last thing you need, right?
Yeah, for sure. In those situations, it's all about doing every job once and doing it right once, right? You don't rush, especially, kind of one of the joys on a Saturday night, and I say joy because it's very much a double-edged sword, is that there isn't actually a curfew on a Saturday night, right? Whereas the rest of the week, Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, you have a curfew by which point you have to leave the paddock. There isn't one on a Saturday night. So what that means is you still have to get the car in sort of one piece and under a cover by the time specified by the FIA. But what it means is you can carry on doing some back of house stuff. Right. And what one of the things that I feel like even after 10 years, I used to forget this, right, is that if I change an engine on a Saturday night, the problem that I now have is that I still need a spare engine for Sunday morning, right? So I've put an engine in the car, that's all good, but for Sunday morning, I don't know what could happen before the race. I still need to have a spare engine ready. So my Saturday night could be spent in the garage, not building the engine that's now in the car, but building a spare, being prepared for the worst Sunday morning. So it can drag on a bit, and it can be a little bit of work, like I said. But you can sort of take your time a bit more on a Saturday night, and then make sure that your Sunday morning goes as smoothly as possible.
As for Sunday, look, before we get into it and break down, let's listen to the drivers, Isack and Max. This is what they had to say after their 2026 Austrian Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think the race, honestly, was probably a little bit better than expected. But, I take it. It's been a really good race pace. I do have to say that I think the first half of the race was probably our strongest, because for the second half, I picked up something on the rear, which made the car really stiff and not very compliant anymore, which... Yeah, it was performance limiting, let's say like that. But still, to be that close to a win, I think is of course extremely positive.
And going into Silverstone, another home race for us. Do you feel more confident after this weekend with all the upgrades and everything we've brought to the car, how we're performing in general?
I think we performed really well, in the race. So I hope that we could do something similar in Silverstone. But of course, the layout is very different there. So we just take it step by step.
Happy with the race start, first of all. Big improvement from Barcelona. So that's a good point. And I think, starting from 8th, we had an aggressive race and we just tried to, pit early. So I was always kind of running out of tires at the end of my stints. So probably not the fastest race. Definitely the most efficient to gain those 2 places. But yeah, clearly today I think we had the second fastest car. So yeah, big improvements.
Big improvements across the weekend in terms of the car. You're happy with where we're at now? We've got this upgrades package.
I'm happy with the performance. I think Max, got very close from winning. He was in the fight with the Mercedes. I still think they have the edge, but I think in qualifying we've always been pretty decent. Now we made a step in the race. I think these conditions, very hot track conditions, doesn't help us at all. So I think on a cooler track, hopefully next week we can be a little bit more competitive again.
Cal, it was a driver of the day performance from Max Verstappen, a great recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Max, coming into this race, knowing how much sort of it all hinged on how these upgrades went and everything else. I think they'll come out of the weekend and Max will be pretty happy with the result. And certainly it bodes well for what we're looking at in the future. Right now, it's beyond that as well, actually. Beyond that, was it all four Red Bull Ford powertrains in the top 10 today? All of them brought home points.
Another one. Yeah,
absolutely. Again, this was always a year of building and progress. This was a race where we needed to see some of that progress really come to fruition. I think we did. There's always going to be an opportunity to go and win it, right? You're always going to say that, oh, maybe we could have done this better. Maybe we could have done that better. It's a really tough call. I mean, what would you done in that situation when George boxed?
Mate. The thing is, you can play for a safety car. You can go long. You can.
Yeah.
I mean, again, look, not to sit on the fence, but I'm going to sit on it. The thing is, as well, we don't know how much, did George have pace in hand and he was just managing to the end, because we know Mercedes have struggled with reliability and the heat. You just don't know. Obviously, Kimi's, driving and if Kimi had a stronger start, he'll be thinking there's opportunities missed for him as well. So, yeah, look, I think, honestly, it's beyond my pay grade to say whether we made the right or wrong decision. I'm just going to stick to the podcast, Cal, all right?
Well, do you know what? I'm braver than you. So I'll tell you what, I'll tell you this, right? Is that when I was watching it, my first thought was, yeah, I get it. Leave Max out, because before he caught George, he kind of looked like he had the pace, and that if he had clear air, he'd be able to extract a little bit more from him. And then you only discovered, 2 laps later, that there's just no more to give from those tyres. So I can perfectly understand why they made that call. I do think that, had we just gone with the cover George and pit maybe a lap or 2 laps after him, I do think we would have been in a better shot of winning. But I completely understand the logic of making that decision that we made.
Hindsight's a beautiful thing. You can only make a decision with the information you have at hand. And, the data simulations we have, it's running like billions of different simulations of every single permutation. And ultimately, you've got to make a call. But also, all the other teams have got very similar systems, so they're all trying to work against each other. Yeah, I mean, it's an hour and a half race and we finished 1.5 seconds off the win. So of course there's going to be an opportunity, right?
And also that thing of just staying out longer, like you say, it does open up the chances of a VSC or a safety car. As soon as you pit, that opportunity's gone. The longer you can wait, that opportunity's still there. So I completely get it.
Yeah, I mean, Kimi was within 1 lap twice of gaining from a VSC. So that kind of says all you need to know. Look, I think all in all, again, we're still so early on in this season.
Yep.
Like, we're still not even halfway through. And to have delivered a package to Max where, he seemed particularly happy on the hards. But again, that power unit seemingly working well in the big challenge as well. Again, I want to kind of emphasize there is, the altitudes at Austria, it's the first time these power units have really faced that. To come away again with all 4 cars, and we've mentioned this before, we're going to mention it again, because every time all 4 Red Bull Ford powertrains cars get in the top 10, we are going to gloat about it in the Talking Ball podcast, aren't we, Cal?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. What another one. It's just amazing for a first year. I'm not going to get tired of it, right? I think what an incredible job we've done. So yeah, what a great position to be in the first year of the project.
As much as, you see Max P2 and he's at P6, I think there was a P4 there for Isack, I think, if things had gone a little bit more his way.
First thing you have to say about Quali here in Austria is it's such a short lap that 10th and a half is a much bigger sort of gap between first and eighth, right? At a different lap, I think, a different circuit, I think that sort of performance would have translated to further up the grid. Look, I think he's got to be happy with the pace, right? It seems like he's not had this thing of completely falling off the pace when you upgrade a car, because we've seen that before, where one driver just can't get his head around the upgrades. It seemed like he got to grips with it all really quickly, despite losing some time in FP1. Great result for Isack. Another few points in the bag. Move on to Silverstone, and as I said, I think it's a bit of a key race, Silverstone. It could sort of be a bit of a turning point in the season for everyone.
After Quali, he was like, my Q3 lap was good, but prior to that all weekend, I've not been happy, which just shows that actually, if he can get to a place eventually, which is his first season at the team, where he can continue to grow into that ceiling, like that bodes well for the future. So yeah, of course, going into Silverstone, look, don't want to get carried away, right? This was great. I think we were the second quickest car this weekend in Austria. But again, just like with Lewis and Ferrari kind of going the other direction from Barcelona into Austria, from what you've seen over all your many years being part of this F1 circus, Cal, this performance in Austria, how much of it do you think will translate? Because of course, Austria it has the low speed, it has the traction zones, but it doesn't have the incessant fast flowing sectors.
I think it's going to be like nearly 10 degrees cooler, which could make a big difference anyway. I kind of get the impression that it might not really make a big difference to us. I don't think we're terrible at getting tyres in the working window, If anything, Austria and these hot tracks are just a big stress in keeping them where you need them and not letting them sort of spiral out of control. So it will be, like I said, it will be very, very different. And you know what? Before we move on from talking about Austria, shout out to the pit crew today. Some solid pit stops in there. So great job by the pit crew. I know there's a lot of work been going into that kind of stuff as well. So yeah.
All in all, fantastic result given, again, the season, how it started, how we've moved on. We're definitely moving in a good direction, which is great. Also, want to give a shout out to F2 feature race winner Nicola Solov. He's done it again. 4 wins this year, 3 feature races as well. Worldy start, P3 to P2 into turn 1, then took the lead in turn 3 and kind of never looked back, really. Won by a couple of seconds in the end. Incredibly impressive from Nicola this season, Cal, got to be said.
Yeah, mate, really, really good. I think he's working hard to put himself in the conversations, right? In the right conversations for where he wants to go. It's been a really good start to the year for him. I think for the rest of it now, he's just going to be focused on consistency, right? Consistently deliver for the rest of the year, and we'll see how he gets on.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Right. So we do have Cal kindly did the shout out, didn't you, on our Instagram? I saw it. Of you asking for questions for the podcast.
Yes,
so
I did.
Let's start with the Evgo 77. Apologies for butchering your name. What did we upgrade on the car and how will it affect it? So yeah, what are the main kind of upgrades you want to draw attention to, and how do you think they've affected the performance around Austria?
Well, I mean, the list is so long, right? I think pretty much the only thing we didn't bring and declare on the FIA document was a front wing, which I think we've just brought earlier on in the season. I think front wing upgrades have already arrived, and this was sort of the rest of it to go with it. But yeah, look, the obvious changes are things like floors, side pod inlets. Those are sort of the areas where you're just trying to condition that airflow to get down the car. And ultimately, what you're looking for is more efficiency and more consistent and sort of predictable load on the car, aerodynamic load, right? So the way that you can make the air flow across those surfaces. How much of a bigger difference does it make? Well, that's the big debate, because alongside these weight loss upgrades that the car's been going through sort of week on week and trying to shed the weight that it had at the beginning of the season, it does become a little bit harder for us outside of the garage to quantify what came from where. I'm very sure that if you could convince one of our engineers to sort of run you through the numbers, we could get a better idea of what was doing what. But yeah, I think this week was all about sort of continuing, from the front wing upgrades that have been, and just conditioning that airflow all the way to the back of the car, because one of them was exhaust. Tailpipe was one of the upgrades declared. So it's all about conditioning that air all the way through the car.
Right, next question from Kelvin Jacobs. Your opinion on the yellow flag situation in Q3. So did you, what did you make of it, Cal, basically? Max, of course, having his incident, and then George still being able to put his lap in, where on the face of it, it was a bit like, oh, hang on a second, how's he been able to do that?
Yeah, I got to admit, I was a little bit confused, just because from the nature of the crash that Max had, I would have expected it to be a double yellow, right? Those are the sort of, that was the big surprise for me, I mean, ultimately, George said, well, I saw it was a yellow on the panel. He knows the rules. He did what he had to do. And good for him, man. Knowing the rules and what you can and can't get away with is half of this sport for the drivers, right? And he's done a top job on that, and it, the communication between Bono and Kimi, we heard about that communication and them trying to sort of make the right decision as to what you can do. But, by the time you've had to think about it on a qualifying lap, it's done, it's over. So, yeah, look, I think that was the big surprise for me, is that I would have expected it to have been a double yellow. hey, it's what it is.
Yeah, I mean that again. It's you don't hate the player, hate the game. I think it obviously didn't help. I think the commentary, at least what I was watching, just assumed it was a double yellow,
Yeah.
which I assumed it had been a double yellow because we've seen red flags for incidents like that. Again, it's a high-speed corner, and I think the best, it doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter if it's Schumacher, if it's Senna, if it's Verstappen, if it's Hamilton, whoever, they know the rules and they know what they when they can exploit things and when they can't, and George exploited that opportunity and made the most of it. So I think credit to him as well. I completely agree, Cal. We're going to have to disagree on something soon.
We can find something.
For next one from Irk MLS, do you think that with today's result we can expect more from this car?
It's a starting point, right? I think you look at this race and ultimately you say we are headed in the direction we want to be headed. Like, second fastest car today out there on circuit. And had we put the opportunity to start the race further up, I genuinely think we could have been talking about challenging for the win on pure pace.
Next from JD Loss 2010. Why wasn't Max put on medium tyres at the end of the race? Now, the immediate thing I thought with this is that actually, because there is an assumption, and it's often the case, that the softer the compound you go on, the quicker you're going to be, the more comfortable you're going to be, whatever. But that isn't always the case. And like Max spoke specifically about feeling quite happy on the hard tyre. So I imagine that feedback from the driver also plays into the decisions. A compound might be half a second quicker on paper, but in reality, that's not always the case, right?
No, especially when you've got high track temps, drivability becomes a much more important factor. And, we heard GP say to Max on the radio, do you want the medium or what compound do you want, the hard or the medium? And Max said this one. He'd driven enough laps on it. He was comfortable with it. He knew where he could push it. He knew where it was going to start to suffer. And just having that knowledge in at race weight and in a sort of race situation was sort of the better choice. Stick with what the devil It wasn't just about chasing the win today. We did have Kimi very, very close to us at the end as well, right? So you had to make the right call. Ultimately, I think choosing the hard over the medium was obviously the right call.
Absolutely. Right. Final question from Ojo Stristers. I'm going to give it that. I'm going to try. What was the most challenging part for the team during this Austrian Grand Prix weekend?
Look, it would have been the work Saturday night, right? No one wants to have a qualifying shunt, especially like I said, this is a nice place to go and spend an evening looking out at the beautiful view on the balcony of your hotel. So everyone would have very much wanted to get back, have a few beers, watch the England game. And instead they would have spent their evening in the garage repairing a car. But that's how it goes. But that will have been the toughest workload for everyone. And it's one of those things where it wouldn't just be Max's car crew. It would have been both car crews. Everybody would have chimed in to get the work done. And yeah, like I said, it would have been the toughest point in the weekend, but ultimately worth it, right? When you finish P2.
No, look, I think, again, all in all, I'm going to say it one more final time just for you. This has been a successful weekend for the team. Silverstone, as we've spoken about, I guess what the team's going to be flying back overnight, driving back. I imagine a lot of doesn't need to be air freighted, right, from Austria to Silverstone.
No. The trucks will be driving all the equipment. The trucks, hospitality, that'll all be driven by road. The teams, the lucky engineers will have got themselves home this evening. Right, the mechanics and technicians will be early tomorrow morning. And actually, I was just thinking about that last question. And one of the most challenging things for me in Austria was surviving the morning after the truckie barbecue. Now, traditionally, our garage technicians, they host the barbecue for the team at the hotel. We've got some great food and some drinks. And that was always tough in the morning. That was always one of my biggest challenges in Austria. It was the headache the following morning on Thursday morning.
Right, thank you all for watching, for subscribing, for liking, for interacting with the Talking Ball podcast, however you can and will. We will be back for the British Grand Prix next weekend, and we are about to go and film some My Paddock bits, so go and check out My Paddock as well on the Oracle Red Bull Racing website, where we'll answer a few more of your questions. Cheerio, pleasure as always, arrivederci.